it's the kiss of death to be bad at things you think you're good at. I was running a 400-person business when I had no operating experience. You're going to cut 60% of your revenue and you will become immediately profitable.
How can you build a foundation for scaling so that you don't have to fix those things once you actually want to scale?
90% of the time, the answers are there. You just need to know how to look. The single most important skill, budgeting and forecasting models. You're going to do a 5-year budgeting and forecasting model, the last 4 years of which are bullshit. In terms of how much capital you need, double it.
You have to also be aware of the people that you hire and whether they are the best fit for you.
Tell me 3 to 5 numbers you use to make decisions. If they can't answer that question cleanly, you need to get rid of them.
What is the biggest difference in the skill set that you need to have as an entrepreneur between the building stage and the scaling stage?
I think that
he is a serial entrepreneur with over 30 years in the game, built and sold 15 businesses and had multiple 8- and 9-figure exits. Brown University graduate, Wharton MBA, and a 3-time Inc. 500 entrepreneur. But here's the thing. David Guttman believes that traditional business school does not actually teach you how to start and run a business. And to prove his point, he brought on an 18-year-old recent high school graduate, and after seeing her work ethic, dedication, and passion for business, made her CEO of a brand new company. So today, I'm sitting down with both of them to talk about what it really takes to build and run a company successfully. Hello and welcome to Janashia podcast. We have 2 amazing guests here. We have David Guttman and Anna Bruchinka, and we're going to be talking about entrepreneurship, but from very interesting aspects and in very interesting context. So let me start by asking you, David, take us a little bit back in time and tell us what were the first signs of you having the entrepreneurship ability, but also interest to pursue that. I feel that it has been hyped for the last few years, but it's still something that few people have natural ability in.
So growing up, my dad started a software company in his late 20s that eventually went public. And that went reasonably well. He got pushed out of his own company. And so I saw the things he did well, and I saw the mistakes that he made. And what I learned was it's okay to be bad at things in business, but it's the kiss of death to be bad at things you think you're good at. And so part of why, again, today I would advise don't get an MBA, but back then when there was no internet, no YouTube, things like that, I wanted to find a way to learn enough about every area of business so that no one could bullshit me about anything. So I went back and got my MBA, and ultimately, I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur because I had seen, my dad, I think, without necessarily a full skill set, still be pretty successful. And I felt like I could fill in some of those blanks. And ultimately, I knew that the only way to create real wealth back then that I saw was to be able to create something yourself.
So how old were you when you started your first serious business?
I went to Wharton for my MBA, and there's so much groupthink in sort of these top MBA programs, you want to get a job working for an investment banking firm or consulting. That's where those are the jobs that everyone is competing for. And I actually had 3 job offers for 3 different consulting firms, which I turned down. And the reason I turned them down was I did something that it's called a search fund. And the way a search fund works is you basically go to angel investors, and you basically say, hey, look, I want you to give us a little bit of seed capital. We're then going to go and we're going to search for a business to buy, and we're going to give you a right of first refusal to give us the equity capital to buy that business in exchange for us getting carried interest. So basically, me and my partner, we spent a year and a half finding a business to buy. We were getting a $50,000 a year salary when our market rate was probably $150,000, so we're getting a pittance of a salary. But once the company was purchased, we each got 10% of the business. And so now I was 28 running a 400-person business when I had no operating experience. So I knew that the best way to accelerate my professional growth was to get experience operating a business. And so instead of taking the more traditional path in consulting, I decided I was going to do this search fund. And so that was really what opened the door. Like, it was also the first time I ever raised capital. So that was a super interesting experience.
So you going to Wharton Business School is a very non-traditional path for a lot of entrepreneurs, because a lot of entrepreneurs are like, they they want to start a business right away. So they kind of work around the traditional like business education, but also starting out with buying a company and, getting investors is also not like the most typical thing, because most entrepreneurs like found their own company and hustle and grind their way through the first success. So how did that happen? Like, what was the spark of that idea that's how you got started until you got to the point where you're like, I'm managing this 400 people team? Like, where did this idea even come from?
So I had a close friend at the time that was 1 year ahead. He had gone to Stanford Business School and he was 1 year ahead of me. And he started a search fund. He actually asked me to do the search fund with him, but I didn't think we had too much overlap in our skill set. So I didn't think we'd make good business partners. Good guy, but we did too much overlap, and I knew that was not a good match. But he was the one who told me about the concept of a search fund. And what I knew was I wanted to get operating experience. I knew that in order to be successful, and I didn't know if that business would be successful, but I knew that even if that business wouldn't be successful, the operating experience would kind of spill over into whatever I did next. Mm-hmm. And that business the thing that was cool about that, I raised capital, which I'd never done, bought a company, which I'd never done. And then we did 12 additional acquisitions. So we did a roll up. And so, I got a lot of M&A experience. And what I had done was I knew enough to know I had no idea what I was doing. I knew I did not know what I was doing. So I hired, there was a company in our industry called Pro Communications. They were kind of the blue chip company in our space. It was the CEO was the guy who was the ex-COO of Nextel, and he was a notorious asshole. Mm-hmm. And he had a 3-person female management team that were awesome. I had met them at some conferences, and I've been courting them to try to get them to leave Procom and come to work, with me. And so I shockingly was able to persuade them to leave their really good paying jobs to come basically work for me. And even though technically they reported to me, Sharon Grossman, who was our COO, she was basically mentoring me for the next 5 years. And my leadership style and management style came directly from her.
Okay. So little bit segueing into, because you decided to now kind of pass that knowledge on to other entrepreneurs like Anna, who are starting out, because you have this accumulated knowledge of all the things that went wrong, all the failures that you learned from, the mentors, the amazing people that you actually learned the operating skills, the skills of how to scale the business, not just build it, but scale it and then exit, because you have exited a lot of businesses. We're gonna circle back on that. And you decided to kind of pass that knowledge in a form of like training of how to build, scale, and exit a business. So first of all, I want to ask you, you're 18 years old, which is mind-blowing, by the way. So first of all, talk about how do you have the confidence to know this is what I want to be doing? I want to try, entrepreneurship. I want to follow this program training, and I want to build a business, scale it, exit. You're probably a little bit naive, but still knowing that it is going to be hard. It is going to be challenging. It's not going to be like an easy sailing. So how do you have that confidence at such an age?
I think that's a really good question. I probably didn't have the confidence that I was able to do it until I met David. That's why he's such a good mentor of mine. And I think I know that this is what I want to do because I've seen the lifestyle that this kind of job leads to, and I love traveling, and I love making new connections, and I love talking to people. So that's, in that sense, it just felt like the most natural thing for me to go into, especially because I was influenced a lot by my dad, who's also an entrepreneur. And I saw him fly out to all of the business conferences and bring the most interesting people to our house. So I think that it was always kind of in the back of my mind, even when I was thinking about other professions. I wanted to be a psychologist. I wanted to be like a therapist. But then I figured out that that's probably not for me. And even if this is not the job for me, I think that I should try it out at least and go all in since I'm young.
Okay, so building a business is something everyone's trying to do. And a lot of people fail at this and some kind of make it. And from those people who actually make it, even fewer of them actually manage to scale it to the next level. So what is, from your experience, and this is actually super valuable for me personally, because I think we are in the stage where we're kind of in the middle of the scaling phase where a lot of the business skills are missing to really kind of go full in. So what is the biggest difference difference in the skill set that you need to have as an entrepreneur between the building stage and the scaling stage?
I think there are two characteristics that really make the difference. Number one is you have to be you brought this up in our podcast, and when you were on my podcast, you have to be a little bit obsessed. You just have to be like, failure is just not an option. So there has to be that just incredible drive. And the second piece that I think is a lot less obvious is you have to be humble. Because the mistake people make is when you start the business and you start to have some success, you can get drunk off your own success and think you're the smartest person in the room. And that is the thing that is so dangerous. Mm-hmm. You have to always be, because again, it's like you want to have, we always talk about this, you want to have, strong opinions loosely held. Here's the direction I think we should go, and here are the reasons why. Until you're presented with information or data or results or customer feedback that tells you you're wrong. And if you're too emotionally invested in being right because you're so smart, it's the kiss of death. And so to me, if you can remain humble and you just are tenacious, those are the most important things. Now, there are tactical things on the execution side that just have to be there. And quite frankly, those come from experience. And so, and kind of like you were smart enough and open-minded enough and introspective enough to be like, hey, I know I'm going to need some mentors to be able to help me. In fact, you were even smart to say, I need two different kinds of mentors. Most people don't think that way. And so I think that just like I did, I knew I didn't know how to operate a 400 or 500 person, call center business. So I found a team of 3 people that have been running call center businesses and had them teach me. What I basically said to Sharon and her team was, I said, you can keep working for that jerk, okay, and do whatever he says, or you can come here and tell me what to do. Right? Yeah. And you can be the architect of what we're doing. I said, and I'll listen. And I did.
Okay, so a follow-up question on this. I'm trying to make my business successful, right? I'm trying to grow it to the level before I start scaling it. And there are so many skills. As an entrepreneur, you are a generalist, right? There are so many different skills that you need to learn. You need to learn how to do sales, marketing, branding, product, managing the team. How do you know, or how do you prioritize which skill set is the most relevant or important for you, and kind of find the mentor or resources to learn that? Is there kind of a specific order of learning these things? And you should avoid trying to learn all at once, or would you say you should just learn as much as possible at the same time?
That's a really good question. So Elon Musk talks about this, people I think a lot of people fancy themselves entrepreneurs because they don't understand what it actually means. Because if you're CEO of a business, or even just a senior level executive, your job is to solve the most difficult problems the business has that nobody else wants to do and nobody else can do. So I'll give you an example. So when I came on to this telemedicine company, that was the 9-figure exit that I had, I didn't know the industry at all. And the reality was the pain point we had was sales. I had never run sales before. I'd never managed a sales team before, but that's what the business needed. So that's what I had to do. It's as simple as that. And what I would say that one of the wonderful things today is you might not have a natural affinity for a particular skill set. Like some people are just the idea of having to do a sales call. Yeah. They'd rather get a root canal. Yeah. Yeah. And there are other people that love doing sales calls. There are some people that can't stand doing operational things. Mm-hmm. What I would say is if you want to be a really good, C-level CEO, president type person, you have to be able to, even if you don't love it, you have to be able to do every aspect of the business, maybe not forever, but at least for a little while. And so that's what the business needed. So that's what I did. And so the way I think about it is, what's the single biggest pain point? We were 6 to 8 months away from bankruptcy. We needed revenue. We needed a business model and a sales process that would work. So that's all I spent my time on because that was the biggest pain point. So wherever the biggest pain point is, that's where you need to focus. And then you work your way down to the second biggest pain point and the third biggest pain point.
Yeah. Okay, so this is kind of a retrospect of the past. So we can use this different perspective of, because you are looking actually in the future, right? So you have all these things ahead of you. So from your perspective and working with David, what are the most overwhelming things that kind of overwhelm you in terms of like, I have to figure this out and all these things at once? Like, what is the most challenging thing for you right now? You being right in the middle of trying to build a business, trying to make that first step of that build, scale, exit formula, so to say.
Yeah, I think that everything is pretty overwhelming at this point because I have no prior experience whatsoever. So I am learning everything as I go, and I'm learning all of the skills at the same time. And I think it depends on what phase of the business you're in. So first, I had to learn the legal requirements to start a business, LLC, C Corp, S Corp, all of those kind of the terminology also for that. I read a bunch of legal documents. It was my least favorite thing to do.
Imagine.
Yeah, it's horrible. Then that passed because the business is now created. And then the next part was, okay, how do I develop a website? Who do I hire? Who do I work with? How do I inspire? How do I make them feel like they're working for a purpose? And how do I manage them at the same time? Because I thought that everybody basically could manage themselves. And that proven to be partially true. Some people, as David says, all people need a leader, but some people also need a manager. I had to learn that as well, and I'm still learning as I go. So I think I focus on one skill at a time, and that makes it a little bit more manageable. But there's always a lot of things on the plate that you have to think about. So if I'm learning one skill, if I'm focusing on one skill, it doesn't mean that I don't have all of the other things that I have to do in the back of my mind.
So how do you navigate that? First of all, a lot of entrepreneurs, and I know this is actually true for many people, they get hyped like, I have this super idea, I want to get started, and they hit an obstacle, but also they realize that they have to do stuff which is extremely unenjoyable, like having to learn about the legal stuff and taxes and all this stuff, and they lose motivation at the first obstacle, and they're like, wait a minute, this is not what I signed up for. So first of all, how do you navigate knowing how to deal with all this overwhelming stuff, because you are learning everything at once? Like, you have no business experience, so it means that everything that you are doing is for the first time, but also having to do those non-enjoyable stuff, and kind of going through that first phase before you reach the point where you have the confidence, you have the knowledge, and things become more enjoyable. Like, how do you basically decide, I'm going to keep going and not quit?
I think there are two parts to this question. The first being, how do I navigate everything at once? And for that, I have David. I think mentorship and coaching is one of the most powerful ways to get yourself a head start in any industry. As for how do I keep going when passion goes away, I think this is kind of a mindset that my dad has instilled in me. My dad always said that passion is fleeting, but persistence stays. So I always knew that my passion with whatever business I decided to do was going to last maybe a few months. After that, it's all about being persistent, just keeping pushing. And also, I think that passion is a feeling and it's an emotion rather rather than the state of mind. And you can elicit any kind of emotion in yourself by thinking the right things. So when I need to be passionate, when I need to talk about the business, I can get myself excited and talk about it. But on a daily basis, it's more about persistence and trying to get it started and just going with it, even if it's hard, even if it's, even if I don't know what I'm doing, I'm still trying to do something to get to the point where I can perhaps, leave the business be on its own at some point.
So you accept it's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows, and you kind of go through that through persistence. Okay, another question for you, David. So what do you think? Because you are, again, a few people can build successful businesses, but even fewer can build multiple successful businesses, exit them. So in each business that you've successfully built, scaled, what would you say was the single common denominator in making each one of them successful?
I actually think making businesses successful is easier than people realize. So in addition to the exits I've had, I also consulted to a lot of businesses. And in almost every case, I'm consulting about a business in an industry I know absolutely nothing about. And so I'll just give you two quick examples. So one was a company, you're probably too young to remember what a CD-ROM even is. But CD-ROMs before DVDs. So I was doing a consulting project for a company that did high production quality CD-ROMs. And they were 4 to 6 months away from bankruptcy. My partner, he basically would sell the project. He would sell the consulting projects. He would bill me out at $400 an hour. I'd get $200 for doing the work. Mm-hmm. He would get $200 for selling the project. And he would take half the credit. I would do all the work. It was a great relationship. Yeah. Anyway, so he sells this project. I don't know this industry at all. So and I had 2 weeks. I basically was given 2 weeks to fix the company that had spent 4 years, getting to where they were. And they were months away from going under. And all I did was I interviewed every single person in the company, from the secretary to the CEO and everyone in between. And when I presented to the CEO 2 weeks later and I was explaining to him how to fix his business, he was like, I don't understand. How could you possibly know my business better in 2 weeks than I do in 4 years? And I'm like, I don't. I said, all I did was, I said, your secretary had 3% of the answer. You had 12% of the answer. Your chief marketing officer had 6% of the answer. And all I did was listen and synthesize. Your organization had the answer to your problem. Mm-hmm. Okay. All I did was synthesize it. And, I'll overly simplify it a little bit. They were getting 60% of their revenue from a partnership they had with Yahoo. Mm-hmm. Okay. And all the business they had from them was unprofitable. So I said, you're going to cut 60% of your revenue and you will become immediately profitable. And then you have to change your sales compensation structure and a few other tweaks. But they went from hemorrhaging money to profitable in 2 weeks. I did it again with another company called In-Person Payments. And again, this is before, the internet was like it is now. They would put kiosks in bodegas and check cashers and pharmacies and so on and so forth. And same thing, I came in and I just looked at the data, and it turned out that a pharmacy would do 200 times the volume that a bodega would do. But they had a ton of bodegas and they had very few pharmacies. Their sales comp structure was basically they paid their salespeople the same for a bodega that they would a pharmacy. Again, I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but all we had to do was change the sales compensation structure so that they got paid nothing for bodegas. They got paid a ton of commission for pharmacies, and the business took off like a rocket. So again, I didn't know anything about the industry. All I did was look at the data, interviewed every person in the company, and the answers become clear. Scaling businesses really comes down to listening to your customers, listening to the people that are operating the business, and the answers are almost always there. I'll say 10% of the time, you're screwed. The business can't be fixed. It can't be scaled. But 90% of the time, the answers are there. You just need to know how to look.
And so before you get to this phase where, you mess up so many things, like how can you build a foundation from ground up in a correct way that it's actually built for scaling so you don't have to fix those things once you actually want to scale?
It's a great question, and Anna and I have been working through this. So part of what I think is really important when you're doing a brand new business is you want to find a way to brute force the business where you don't build any systems or infrastructure. So for this one-of-one poster business that she's launching, almost nothing is automated. And that's by design, because I want her to feel the pain of where the bottlenecks are.
Yeah.
And then what you'll do is you say, where are the pain points? How bad is the bottleneck? Fix the biggest bottleneck that has the lowest cost first and work your way down the list. And ultimately what you'll have when you're done is a scalable business.
Okay, then we can switch over to the business. So what is the business? At what stage is the business right now? And, what are some of the things that you are already seeing that are becoming the bottlenecks?
Well, the business right now is about to launch. We're really close to the day that we are going to launch. Our website is almost completely built out. We have the manufacturer secured, so it's almost ready to go. I think that there are not a lot of bottlenecks that I can identify right now. There are some bottlenecks in the development process. A lot of the times you have to also be aware of the people that you hire and whether they are the best fit for you. So one of the things that I always try to think about as well is, okay, is the team right before we start? Is the team doing like the right things at the right pace at the right time, right? So that is something that I've been thinking about that is probably one of the bottlenecks and could turn into a bottleneck later on. And I think David can confirm that the team is a very important part of the business in general, yeah.
So I actually learned this in one of the IT projects that I was working on, one of the software development projects from our Scrum Master, where he said no premature optimizations. So we would build this code, we would build the software, and he said, let's not optimize anything. When we hit the bottleneck, then we start refactoring the code. When we need to scale now to multiple features, let's now go back and refactor, not before, because we don't know in which direction this is going to go. So what you were saying in business is stay flexible, especially at the beginning, because you have so many things that you need to validate, right? You don't have so let's not optimize something that may not work. Potentially. Your
refactoring analogy is almost perfect. It's almost a perfect analogy because it's exactly right, which is let the processes show you where the pain points are and then fix it. I feel the same way about hiring. I think one of the big mistakes, one of the things that's really counterintuitive, startup businesses that have too much capital, I think struggle more than startup businesses that have very limited capital. Mm-hmm. Because you'll hire ahead of what you need. You want to hire when you have pain, right? Like things are, all of a sudden things are falling a little behind, and then you hire. And yeah, it does create some headaches in the short term, but the last thing you want to do is hire. That person doesn't have enough work to do. It creates morale issues throughout the whole organization because you've got some people that aren't working hard at all and some people that are killing themselves. And so it creates a lot of ripple effects that are sort of unintended consequences that you don't really think through. And so to me, it's like, don't optimize until you see where the pain is. Don't hire until you've got some pain. And don't overcapitalize the business. I will say with a caveat of once you are getting ready to scale. So what Anna and I are doing with this business is I'm basically funding it in the near term, but we are going to raise capital because I think that's important for people to learn that want to start a business is how to raise capital is a very important factor. And even though I don't think the business will need capital, we're going to raise it anyway because we're going to use that capital to scale faster. Mm-hmm. And so that's really the right time is bootstrap in every way you possibly can. Feel the pain, understand the business. I want Anna as the CEO to understand every single aspect of the business, to taking a customer service call, to what do you do when the manufacturing process fails, to what happens when the website goes down, all of those things, because having those experiences, she's going to learn how to solve those problems, and you only learn by doing.
Okay, and when do I know that it's right time for me to scale the business?
So every business is a little bit different, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to your ability to gain customers and fulfill, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you have both of those processes, you're like, I know I can get my customers at a reasonable customer acquisition cost to lifetime value ratio, and so I figured that out. and I can do that at scale. So I can do that part of the business at scale, and I can fulfill at scale. So long as both of those things are true, the rest of it is basically infrastructure and people. So once I have those two problems, then you're ready to scale.
And okay, let's say I've reached that level. I have a product market fit. We have the fulfillment kind of in place, and we know that now it's time to get the customers in and basically just do more sales. What are the immediate first steps that I need to start doing in order to make sure that when we get more sales, when we start fulfilling more products, the whole business doesn't just crash under this immense pressure?
So one of the things that I've done, I think it's the single most important skill for an entrepreneur or a CEO that wants to grow, scale, and exit a business that unfortunately it just isn't focused on, and that is the ability to do budgeting and forecasting models. Okay. It's very counterintuitive. I didn't realize it at first, but every business that I would go and consult to, or when I would be hired on as a CEO or whatever it might be, the very first thing I would do every single time is build a bottoms-up, super detailed budgeting and forecasting model, because what that does is it forces me to understand all of the unit economics of the business, right? What are the levers that make the business work or not work? And the other thing it allows me to do is it allows me to sort of see, because ultimately you put generally when you do it properly, you're going to do a 5-year budgeting and forecasting model, the last 4 years of which are bullshit.
Okay.
The first 12 months, not exactly bullshit, but they're directional at best. Yeah. But the first 12 months needs to be what am I paying for all my SaaS tools? What are my employee costs? When am I going to have to hire a COO or a head of marketing or whatever it might be? Yeah. You have to plan for all of those things. And then ultimately, if you do that properly, it all becomes clear. Ultimately, that becomes a crystal ball. And so if you do that well, it's going to point out, because it's going to force you to think through, when am I going to have to make each hire? Does everyone need a laptop? You know what I'm saying? All those little things. And when you do that budgeting and forecasting model, what I always tell people is whatever it tells you need to get to break even in terms of how much capital you need, double it.
Okay.
So if it says you need $750K to get to break even, raise $1.5 million.
Yeah.
Right. I actually 2.5 times is what I do personally, but minimum 2x.
Yeah. Okay. So because you mentioned that you are a big data person, data guy. So how do you source the data and all this information to be able to make this prediction correctly or accurately? Because you still have to kind of see into the future. So how do you get that confidence of saying this data right here is correct and this prediction that I'm making based on that is actually very close to very accurate?
So every business is a little bit different. But I'll give you a couple of examples. So when I would do those interviews of every single person, part of what I'm gathering is what data do you currently use to do your job, right? Here are the spreadsheets I use. Here's the database I access, whatever it might be. And then what I do is I look at all of that. Now, part of the benefit of having a technical background, I've designed databases. I understand those things, right? I know how to write SQL. It's I don't do that stuff myself, but I understand what those things. And I actually have people in my network, data warehousing experts, right? That so when I came on as CEO of this prop trading company in Miami, the data was an absolute mess. The very first thing I did was bring on a data warehouse guy, and I had him synthesize and homogenize all the data from these 3 different disparate databases. So I knew enough to know where the data was, and then I had someone who I knew was an expert, because I was basically flying blind. Yeah. And so step one, I can't possibly make a business decision because I don't have any data. I don't have any information to make them. Are we pricing things right? I don't know. I don't even know what our sales per product line was. So that was step one. And so I spent the first month, and so I'm working on the business side, and my data warehousing guy is dealing with all the data stuff. And then once I was a month in, I had all the data I needed to start making smart business decisions. So, but every business is a little different. But part of that process of getting to know the business and building up your bottoms-up forecasting model is getting access to every piece of data, spreadsheet, Google Sheet, whatever it might be that the company is currently using to manage the operations. And it will become clear what data they have, what data is accurate. You cross-reference things to see if things are accurate or not. You look at what money's going into the bank account, do things tie out. And if you do that and you're pretty analytical and detail-oriented, you can figure out what's broken and what's not.
Let's say you are an entrepreneur who doesn't have that as a strength. Because, you have this type of people who are much more outgoing, creative. Maybe they're great at networking and meeting people. And there are people who are much more analytical. If you are an entrepreneur that has that as a weakness, of course, you can learn it.
Sure.
Would you suggest to find a business partner who is strong in that, or find great people who can execute that? What would be your, if you didn't have that as a strength, what would your strategy be?
Ideally, you have a co-founder that's strong where you're not. So there needs to be one of the founders needs to have that skill set in a perfect world. The next best one is to hire someone, and maybe they're not a co-founder, but they're an equity holding, key executive in the organization where their incentives and yours are well aligned, that has that skill set. But what I would say, because I don't think it's realistic that you're going to become a data expert or a spreadsheet wizard, if those are not your natural proclivities. But you need to know at least enough about those things so that you know that person you're bringing on to do those things, in fact, has that skill set.
So you need to be able to validate that person that
Yes.
they are actually bringing this as a strength. So once you have that data transparency, or you have collected this data, you need to push it out to your organization as well, right? Because the other people in the organization should ideally start making decisions based on this data instead of just blindly as before. So how do you distribute that data to everyone?
So, and again, I know I keep saying this, but every business is a little different. But part of it also depends, like one of the biggest factors is how big of an organization do we have. But let's say it's a decent sized organization with, say, 30 or 40 people, right? What you want to do is you want to go to the head of each department and say, I want you to tell me what 3 to 5 numbers, it can't be less than 3 and it can't be more than 5, 3 to 5 numbers you use to make decisions, right, about whether things are going well or things are not going well. And if they can't answer that question cleanly, you need to get rid of them. But more often than not, they do know. And so basically, that's really what you're doing is you're understanding, because one of the big mistakes people make is they have data and KPIs for data and KPI's sake. If a number is not actionable, meaning like if someone says to me, these are the 3 numbers I use, and I say, okay, if that number is above this amount, what do you do? If that number's lower than this amount, what do you do? And if their answer is they don't do anything, well, that number is not useful. The number is only useful if based on that value, they would make a different business decision. So understanding that the numbers that are being tracked are actionable, based on what the values are. And the other thing too is there are numbers that are very useful on a daily basis that are useless on a weekly basis. There are numbers that are great on a weekly basis that are useless on a daily basis and monthly and so forth. And so understand what data you need to look at daily, weekly, and monthly. Again, you need to have that analytical ability where if you don't have it yourself, you need to have someone on your operating team that does.
So in Anna's case, the business idea that she's working on. So what would you suggest her or advise her to already prepare in terms of later having this business intelligence, so to say, already built in the company that she can make decisions based on this data, but also kind of manage her team not through just gut feeling and intuition, but also based on this very specific information and also make predictions? So
what are the 2 most important pieces of data that I taught you?
The CAC and the lifetime value.
Exactly.
Okay. Can you explain?
Customer acquisition
She learned well.
cost. It's customer acquisition cost and lifetime value. David always says that it's easier to retain a customer than to get a new one. Well, more cost efficient at least, not necessarily easier. So those are the 2 that I need to look at the most. right now, we don't have either of those because we haven't launched the business. Yeah. But we can make educated guesses based on data that we've gathered from friends and family. Mm-hmm. And then if what we get in the real world is drastically different from what we predicted, there's a problem. Mm-hmm. If not, then we're good to go, and we can collect the actual data once we launch.
And then you can adjust the database.
And we can just adjust, yes.
Okay, so what is your market launch strategy right now?
So we have a lot of different angles. One of the angles is we're doing an organic content approach. For that, I'm filming my whole journey of building the business, being super transparent because I have not seen a lot of information about how to build an actual business online, even though people claim that they are the guru of whatever it is that they are doing. So I'm trying to share what the reality of what it is like to build the business. And this is the organic approach. Then there's the paid ads. We're going to have a social media paid ads campaign. We're going to have some ads on Pinterest. We're going to have some ads on Instagram. And we'll see how that goes because we need to also gather data. Ads are a really great way to gather data, to see which audiences are engaging more than others and so forth. Mm-hmm. And we're also going to try one of the most exciting ones that I like the most is user-generated content. So, for example, we find a list of, for example, 10 micro-influencers, the ones that they have maybe a few thousand followers or maybe 1,000 followers, but they're very, very engaged with their audience and they're more likely to show something like this on camera. We send them a package that is very personalized, right? They are receiving something that we've done some research on, and then they unpackage it in front of the camera, they show the poster, they share what they think, and that is one of the strategies that we're also going to be using once we find those people that are the right fit for us.
And then all of that will again be data sources that you can feed in. So how do you, this is another interesting thing, in the context of startups, because we have this lean approach, you create the minimum viable product and you launch as fast as possible. And then based on the customer feedback on the version 1, you basically improve the product and make it better and kind of have this feedback loop. So are you using the same approach?
Yeah, we are. It's called the brute force approach by David. So we're trying to get the product out there as fast as possible, gather the data, and then figure out what to iterate, what to change as we go. But that is the very, very much
the one thing I would say too is that a brand new startup business, you attack the problem in a very different way than an existing business that you're making adjustments to. Quite frankly, startups are way harder than fixing broken businesses is way easier than doing a pure startup. But the pure startup does have some interesting benefits to it because you can do the brute force approach, which you can't do with an operating business. But like as an example, the two most important things are what is it going to cost us to get a customer and how much money are we going to make from each customer. The reality is, getting those numbers, we've made estimates based on substitutes and alternatives and I have a fair amount of experience and people in my network do as well about paid advertising and what kind of conversion rates you can get and so forth. So we have a directional idea that our lifetime value is going to be north of $200 and our customer acquisition cost is going to be around $25. Now, to hone in on those, because by the way, those numbers are wrong. I already know they're wrong. I just don't know how wrong, right?
Yeah.
But directionally, I'm very confident that those are in the ballpark. And if anything, they're probably conservative. I think we probably can get our customer acquisition cost lower. And I think we can get our lifetime value higher. But again, if I can make the numbers work with very conservative estimates, and the beautiful thing about things like paid advertising, you can ABC test pricing as an example so easily to figure out where you're going to be able to actually charge. And ultimately, and what you can charge, obviously, is one of the biggest factors in lifetime value. So we can nail down customer acquisition cost pretty quickly through paid advertising. And then know that the things we do on social media, where it's more, earned and organic, that those things are only going to bring our customer acquisition costs down.
Yeah.
So if on a paid basis, we know we're making money, it can only get better from there.
Yeah. So converting the cold traffic from paid ads is actually much more difficult than the organic traffic. Let's talk about the team and the skill set that you need at the initial stage of building a business. So, you have limited resources, you have limited budget, you haven't, started generating revenue, but you already have to, get some skills in place, or maybe fund the skills with the first revenue stream. So how do you prioritize which skills to hire for at the very initial stage?
I think that it depends on the business, but in our case, we needed to have a website. So we need a web developer. We needed to have someone edit the videos for organic content and for ads. So we need a video editor for that. And we also need a graphic designer to help out the web developer to build the website. So those were the people.
And paid advertising.
And Yep, and paid advertising as well, because we don't know as much about paid advertising as we want to, right? So those were the people that we really focused on. And then we also had David has an amazing network, so we also checked in with a talented social media manager who told us a little bit more about the strategy that we should be using for the business, for the launch. And those were the ones that we prioritized. Just basically look at the needs of the business. What do you need to get it to launch? And just those are the people. Yeah.
Okay, so David, what do you think about building versus buying? Because you have done a few acquisitions in your career. So, and you said fixing an existing business which is broken is much easier than building something from scratch, right? Which, doesn't have any track record, doesn't have any data, no product. So what do you think? Because there are a lot of entrepreneurs who kind of say, you don't have to build anything from scratch. Let's just start with buying the business. So what is your advice? What do you think? First of all, where do you think you learn the most and fastest? And would you advise someone without business experience to actually do the buying or acquisition route first?
That's a really good question. I think you learn different things. And actually, I'll say this. I've done pure startups and had them work out. I'm better at a I'll say a late stage 1, early stage 2 company where they've got revenue, they got traction, they have a bunch of things that are broken. That's where I really, can move the needle very, very fast. The reality is on a pure startup, the big issue is you haven't proven revenue, right? Once you haven't proven the revenue is going to be there, that's the single hardest thing. Once you have revenue, the other stuff's kind of easier to fix. I would say that if you want to build your talent stack faster, a pure startup is better because it's going to force you to get better at more things. I think if you were going to look at probability of success, of a successful outcome, fixing a broken business has a higher probability of success.
And if you want to get started in that, let's say you already have a little bit of revenue stream, and you could use that money to start acquiring maybe businesses under your ecosystem. How would you because it again requires the different skill set to go out there, source the companies, to make the analysis of which companies are actually worth buying and how much. How would you advise someone to start that journey and make the first acquisition?
So it's tricky. It's very tricky. And the reason it's tricky is if you've never done due diligence before on a company, one, companies are reluctant. So if you're going to have to demonstrate that you have the capital to make the acquisition. So if you're going to acquire a business, it's going to take way more startup capital. So like when we did the roll up in the call center space, we raised, I think our original raise was $3 million. And then I think we did a follow-on round of another $2 or $3 million after that. So you're talking 7 figures as opposed to a startup. I mean, we'll have this business launched for less than $10,000, and I think we'll have it profitable having invested less than $25,000. So there's no business you're acquiring for $25,000, at least not one you'd want to acquire. So a lot of it comes down to capital. So what I would say is while acquiring another business has a higher probability of success, your ability to do that, if you don't already have a track record, is probably going to be pretty darn difficult, unless you happen to be independently wealthy, in which case, why bother?
So it kind of follows that order of you build first because you have this, limited resources at the beginning and you can do it with less money. and then you can, go the route of acquiring businesses.
Well, the other thing I would say about it too is maybe you could acquire a vending machine business or a dry cleaning business or a car wash business if you wanted to, but how passionate are you going to be about car washes, right? Or a dry cleaner, as opposed to part of the reason that I wanted to make sure when Anna and I together, she's going to run the business, I wanted to have input on which business that she chose. And yes, I suggested it, but if she couldn't get excited about it, I would not have wanted her to do that business.
Okay.
So, when you're doing something that's a pure startup, it shouldn't be just passion. You're super passionate about what you do in DevOps. That's part of why you're so successful. You've got to have some reasonable level of passion and excitement about what you're doing, or it's going to be hard to keep up that head of steam and that discipline.
Yeah. So I have 3 final questions. First of all, since you already mentioned passion, because, you built a successful company, you have an exit, but you keep doing it. So what is it that kept you going and still keeps you going to stay in this field, to keep building, to help other entrepreneurs build? What is it that makes you so passionate about building these things? Or what is the most enjoyable thing about all of this? I have an idea a little bit, but tell me.
So part of it that's a little bit, that's not obvious is, and I'll be super transparent about this, I have ulterior motives for everything that I'm doing. Right. So I started with the outcome that I wanted. And I think that people need to do this just in business more broadly. Always start at the end point and work your way backwards. What is the outcome you want? Like I asked you about your business. Are you looking to think about an exit? Because if you're thinking about an exit, there are probably a whole bunch of things you would do differently. Yeah. And you said, no, I'm not looking to exit, no time soon anyway. So great. That's going to influence what you're doing. The outcome that I wanted was I want to make investments in something like 8 to 12 businesses over the next 2 to 3 years where I really like the people that are running the businesses and I like what they're doing, so that basically I'm creating, because what I want to do is I want to mentor those people. And yeah, I'd like to, have the unintended consequence of making some money from it, but I'm going to be a lot more excited about the fact that I'm going to make all of them millionaires, right? That's way more exciting to me. Yeah. And so, that's the outcome that I wanted. So then I worked backwards. Well, how am I going to do that? How am I going to know that these are the people that could be successful? Well, I thought to myself, if I had a period of time to evaluate them and see how they're doing, how well did they take coaching and mentorship? Can they make adjustments in the pricing and business model? Are they able to attract and retain and lead talent? These are the things that are going to make businesses successful. Well, hey, best way to do that is to have a limited mastermind where they've basically bought into the fact that they're going to commit to 6 months of coaching and mentorship from me and have them pay for it so they've got some skin in the game. Yeah. And I said, well, what's the best way to do that? Well, hey, if I had a course they had to take and pay for, and I use that as a way to vet them, do they go through the whole course, right? And then what I'm doing is I do basically a coaching call at the end of that to evaluate them and their business idea. So I kind of reverse engineered the outcome that I wanted, which is okay, because I didn't even have the idea to do a course. I did the course because I wanted the outcome of 8 to 12 businesses that I'd invest money in and be helping coaching and mentor those businesses on an ongoing basis all the way through to an exit. That's how I thought about it.
Super interesting. So you first identify what is it that I want to get out of this, and then reverse engineer to how I'm going to get there. And whether it's a course or something else, it kind of naturally fits into that. And last question I have for you is, let's say, you have all these people whose lives you impacted, you help them find their passion, become millionaires. You have touched lives of many, many people. What is one thing that you want to be remembered as by all the people that you have had this in-person connection?
I don't want to sound nihilistic or dark about it, but, I think that 1,000 years from now, probably 100 years from now, it won't matter that I lived, and I'm completely okay with that. And for me, it's more about while I'm here, I think life is such a wonderful, wonderful gift that most people don't that they take it for granted. They don't value it as much as they should. They don't take care of their health. It's like, so for me, it really is just, this is how I want to travel through life. It really isn't more than that. Don't get me wrong. It's how I feel about being a parent. I would love for my daughter to love, respect, admire, and appreciate me, but that's not necessary. That would be nice. My job as her father is to make sure that she's able to be happy and successful in life. I kind of view mentorship the same way. It's wonderful when people are like, gee, Dave, I really appreciate that. You really helped me. But it's not necessary. So long as I get the outcome, I'm good.
Okay. That's very nice. So, Anna, I have last question for you. Because you're literally just looking into the future like you have the entire life ahead of you. So what do you, like, not necessarily goals, but what do you think would be the most ideal outcome of what you're doing right now, like today, in maybe 10 years, when you think about your future self, like, around like 30, 40?
Okay. Well, this is a question that I have to think very carefully about because my family is watching. So I will say it this way. Maybe in a personal conversation you would get a slightly different answer. But here, I will say that, well, first of all, I'm building a business and I want to learn and absorb as much of the knowledge that I can from this first business. I want to succeed because I think if it fails, I'm not exactly excited about that opportunity. So I wanted to succeed. I wanted to exit, and I want to finish my education as well, so that if in case something goes south later on in my life, I have a plan B that I can go back to. That is the part for my family. And but other than that, I think that I want the way that I always imagined my life. It might sound corny, but I have a Pinterest board of how I want my life to look like later on. And that is a lot of travel. That doesn't mean travel for leisure. I just want to travel to be in different countries, to meet new people. That is what I imagine it to be, my job to look like. I really like where David is now with investing in a few companies and making sure that I spread on what I have learned with amazing mentors such as David. So all of that, obviously I don't have an amazing, a very clear vision of what is going to happen in 10 years, probably because I'm at a pivot point right now. Yeah. But I see it becoming something very, very special and exactly the lifestyle that I wanted. So
amazing. David, Anna, thank you so much for this inspiring, for me, all these perspectives, and obviously your experience and insights is extremely valuable. And I actually love the part about the data and analytics and the business processes. I really geek out on that. And I think there are a lot of people who actually, have not enough of that content information. So I think they will be extremely grateful and thankful as well. So thank you a lot for your time and of your insights.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.